She walked into a five-star hotel, wearing plain clothes and carrying an old handbag. People laughed. The staff insulted her. But what happened next shocked the entire room and the internet. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when a woman stepped through the gleaming glass doors of the Rosemont Grand Hotel in downtown Manhattan. The lobby sparkled with gold accents, marble floors, and towering crystal chandeliers that glowed as if they held little suns inside. Staff members moved around in polished uniforms, and guests in designer suits and silk dresses sipped imported coffee on velvet lounge chairs. She stood out immediately, not because she was loud, but because she wasn't. Her clothes were plain, a faded gray coat that had seen better days, simple black flats, and a canvas tote bag hanging from her shoulder. Her hair was tied loosely, not styled like the others, and she wore no makeup or jewelry. She looked like someone who'd taken the subway and trudged the last few blocks in the cold. Kevin, the young receptionist, noticed her immediately. His smirk was subtle but sharp. Leaning closer to his coworker, he whispered something behind a fake smile, and they both chuckled softly. It wasn't loud enough for her to hear, but it was loud enough for others nearby to pick up on the vibe. Guests glanced at her with the kind of curiosity that borders on judgment, the kind that silently asks, "Is she lost?" She walked toward the front desk with measured steps, her eyes scanning the opulence around her without reaction. Kevin straightened up, trying to maintain the professional mask, though his eyes still carried the same arrogance. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice calm and composed. "Is the hotel restaurant open for guests right now?" Kevin looked her up and down, letting the silence linger a beat too long. "The restaurant?" he repeated, blinking as if he was confused by her question. Then he let out a light laugh and asked, "Are you looking for someone?" The woman didn't flinch. "No," she replied. "I'd like to have lunch here." Kevin raised an eyebrow and tilted his head slightly. "Ma'am, are you sure? This is a private luxury hotel. You need a room booking or a member's reservation to access the restaurant." "I'm aware," she replied, still polite. Kevin couldn't resist. "Do you have either?" he drawled, already certain of the answer. A couple standing near the concierge desk turned to look. One of them chuckled quietly, nudging the other as if this was entertainment during their boring wait. Another man scrolling on his phone nearby paused to watch. The woman kept her expression neutral, but her eyes revealed she was fully aware of the attention she was drawing. She glanced toward the restaurant entrance, then back at Kevin. "I was hoping I could be seated now," she said simply. Kevin leaned forward slightly, as if trying to be helpful, but the smirk returned. "Our menu's a bit pricey," he said, tone sharp beneath the fake warmth. "Even the coffee might surprise you." "I'll manage," she said, a hint of firmness in her voice now. He paused, unsure how to respond. There was something unusual about her calmness. Most people in her position would have gotten nervous by now, or angry, but she remained composed, almost as if she had nothing to prove. Kevin gave her a strained smile and said, "One moment, let me check." But instead of checking anything, he turned to his coworker and whispered again, loud enough this time for some guests to catch a few words. "Probably wandered in from the street." Someone in the lounge gave a low laugh. The woman stood silently, hands folded, offering no defense. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. But her silence was powerful and oddly unsettling in a place where people were used to being acknowledged or dismissed in seconds. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting those of a teenage girl sitting with her mother on the side. The girl smiled faintly, an awkward, uncertain smile, but it was the only kindness in that moment. The woman smiled back gently, just for a second. Kevin finally turned back, feigning busyness at the computer. "Yeah, no seats available at the moment," he said casually. "Fully booked." She looked toward the restaurant again. Several tables were clearly empty. She knew it. He knew it. Everyone watching probably knew it too. But she didn't argue. "All right," she said with a calm nod. "Thank you." And with that, she took one slow breath and stepped to the side, standing near the wall as if she were simply waiting. Not for a seat, but perhaps for the truth to reveal itself. Just as she settled near the wall, arms gently crossed, Kevin glanced at her again, this time with something more than amusement. It was as if he felt challenged by her silence. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone he had already dismissed in his mind as unimportant. The smirk on his face sharpened into something uglier. Loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear, he called out sarcastically, "Ma'am, just a heads up. Even a coffee here costs more than your entire outfit." His coworker gasped, but it was too late. Kevin's voice had already echoed across the lobby. A wave of uncomfortable laughter rippled through a small group of guests seated nearby. One woman covered her mouth in shock. Another man chuckled while recording the scene with his phone. Whispers picked up again, louder this time. People were fully invested now. It had gone from casual curiosity to public mockery. The woman's face didn't break into tears or anger, but something subtle shifted in her expression. Her lips tightened for a moment, and the light in her eyes dimmed just slightly. She turned to face Kevin again, slowly, with the same calmness she had shown earlier, but this time her voice carried a quiet strength. "I don't need to fit in here," she said, her tone soft but firm. "To be here." That sentence landed with weight. It didn't need to be loud, it echoed anyway. The laughter stopped. Some guests lowered their eyes, suddenly unsure if they were on the right side of this moment. The man recording the scene leaned forward in his seat, sensing this wasn't going to be a regular viral clip. It was something more. Kevin opened his mouth, possibly to fire back with another comment, but for the first time, he hesitated. There was something in her eyes that unsettled him now. Not weakness, but clarity. She wasn't embarrassed or desperate, just waiting. And somehow, that was more powerful than any defense she could have made. Across the lobby, a woman in a red dress looked at the empty tables inside the restaurant and quietly asked the waiter, "She can't sit? Really?" The waiter said nothing, nervously glancing at Kevin. The teenage girl from earlier whispered something to her mom, who frowned deeply and shook her head. The air in the lobby had changed. What had started as a casual insult had turned into something heavier, something that made people uncomfortable not because of what was said, but because of how they had reacted. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, a soft buzz came from behind the concierge desk. One of the staff picked up the phone. After a few hushed words, he suddenly stood up straighter. I'll get the manager," he said, quickly rushing into the back office. Kevin didn't notice. He was still looking at the woman, unsure whether he should push further or back off. The guests kept watching. Some were embarrassed to laugh. Others waited for the next twist. And the woman? She didn't say a word. She simply stepped aside again, now standing near the tall plant by the window, looking out calmly, as if none of this affected her. But it did. Deep inside, it had scratched something. An old wound, maybe. Not the insult itself, but the way people were so quick to assume, to judge, to mock. And yet she stood, peaceful, but not passive. Hurt, but not shaken. Behind her, the door to the manager's office clicked open. The door to the manager's office swung open, and out walked a tall man in his late 40s, dressed in a sharp navy suit. His pace was quick, almost urgent, and his eyes scanned the lobby like he already knew something was wrong. He moved past the guests, past Kevin, and then he saw her, standing quietly near the window, untouched by the noise, but unmistakably at the center of it. "Ma'am," he said, his voice warm and respectful, "we weren't expecting you today." Kevin froze. The woman turned gently, her expression still calm, and gave the manager a small nod. "Change of plans," she said simply. The lobby fell into a silence so thick it felt like time paused. Kevin's confusion turned into a visible panic. "Wait," he said, looking between the woman and the manager. You know her?" The manager looked at him, confused. "Of course I do. This is Ms. Bennett." Kevin blinked, the name bouncing around in his head like it was in a language he didn't understand. She, he stammered. "She was asking for the restaurant. I didn't know she had a room here." The manager's expression shifted ever so slightly, still composed, but now tinged with disappointment. "She doesn't have a room," he said. "She owns this hotel." The words struck like a thunderclap. Every eye in the lobby widened. The guests who had laughed now looked away in shame. The man recording the video gasped audibly, adjusting his phone to keep capturing every second. The teenage girl sat up straighter, her jaw hanging open. Even the woman's tote bag, once mocked silently by onlookers, now felt like it belonged in a different light entirely. Kevin took a step back. Wait, owns? Like, owns? The manager turned to the woman. Would you like to sit down, ma'am? We'll get the private lounge ready, or the restaurant if you prefer. She shook her head softly. No need for any special arrangements. I just wanted to see how things were going. Quietly. Kevin's face had drained of all color. His mouth opened, then closed again, but no words came. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor beneath his polished shoes. The smirk that had lived on his face just moments ago was gone, replaced by a growing look of dread. The woman stepped forward now slowly, not to gloat, but to speak. She stood in front of Kevin, who looked everywhere but her eyes. So quick to decide who belongs and who doesn't, she said softly. And all it takes is a coat and a quiet tone to be dismissed. The guests who had been whispering and laughing just minutes earlier now sat in awkward silence, realizing they had watched and participated in something far more shameful than amusing. Kevin finally found his voice. I didn't know, ma'am. I thought... You didn't think, she interrupted, still calm. You assumed. The silence that followed was deafening. She turned to the manager and nodded. I'd like a word with the staff before I leave, not just about service, about dignity. Of course, he said, right away. Without another word, she walked past Kevin, who stood frozen with regret, and made her way toward the hallway leading to the conference room. Guests watched her go, not like someone who had just won a confrontation, but like someone who had simply reminded them all what grace, power, and true leadership looked like. The lobby was no longer a place of luxury that measured people by what they wore or how they entered. For a moment, it became something far more valuable, a mirror. And Kevin, still rooted to his spot behind the desk, couldn't stop hearing the sentence echo in his head. She owns this hotel. The room where the hotel staff had gathered was sleek and quiet, walls lined with soft lighting and a long mahogany table in the center. The woman stood at the head of the table, still dressed in the same plain sweater and worn jeans that had invited so much judgment just an hour earlier. But now, not a single eye in the room saw her the same way. Her presence filled the space, not with wealth or power, but with something far more commanding: purpose. The manager stood beside her, hands folded respectfully, while Kevin sat in the back corner, shoulders slumped, face still pale. The humiliation from earlier hadn't faded. It had only grown heavier with time. But what surprised everyone, especially him, was that she didn't single him out. She spoke to the entire team. We all have jobs, she began, her voice even, but that doesn't mean we forget the people behind the roles. A hush fell over the room. I came here today without notice. I wanted to feel the place again, not just walk through it in silence or sign off on renovations from an office miles away. I wanted to see the heartbeat of this hotel, the real one, you. Her eyes met the faces around the table, receptionists, waiters, security, housekeeping, even the young valet boy who had held the door earlier. No one dared look away. I've been in rooms with billionaires who treated me with less judgment than I faced walking through my own lobby today. But this isn't about how I was treated. It's about what that moment represented. She glanced at Kevin, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. How many people come through our doors every week? She asked. How many of them walk in alone, unsure, invisible, hoping for kindness they don't always get in the world outside? No one answered. They didn't have to. We are not just in the business of rooms and reservations. We are in the business of dignity. A murmur of agreement moved quietly through the room. She took a breath and continued. We're trained to look for expensive watches, polished shoes, designer bags, to assume those things tell us something about a person. But they don't. What truly defines a person is invisible. It's in how they treat others, how they carry pain, how they choose to respond to cruelty. She paused again, then added softly, and how we treat them in return is what defines us. Kevin finally raised his hand slightly. Ma'am, I just want to say... She held up a gentle hand to stop him. I don't want to punish you, she said. That would be too easy. You'd apologize, serve a suspension, and maybe do better for a while. But I want something deeper than that. Kevin looked confused. What do you mean? I want this to stay with you, she replied. Not as shame, but as a reminder. That moment today should live in you, not to haunt you, but to guide you. Every time you meet someone who doesn't fit in, I want you to remember what you almost missed today. Kevin nodded slowly, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. I will. I swear. The woman smiled softly, and for the first time that day, her expression showed something different. Grace. She turned to the manager. Let's organize a session. Not a formality, not a checkbox. A real one. I want every member of staff to sit together. No ranks, no uniforms, and talk. About respect. About how we see people. About what it really means to belong. The manager agreed instantly. Consider it done. As the meeting came to a quiet close, the staff slowly stood up. One by one, they approached her, not out of obligation, but with genuine gratitude. The valet boy gave her a quick, shy thank you. A young maid, who had been silent the whole time, hugged her without saying a word. Even the head chef shook her hand, nodding with respect. And Kevin? He stayed seated until the room had nearly emptied. Then he stood up, walked toward her with heavy steps, and whispered, I'm sorry. Not just for today, but for how many times I've probably done this without even realizing. She looked at him for a long moment. You've realized now, she said. That's the beginning. He gave a small nod, unable to speak further. Outside, the lobby had returned to its usual rhythm, but something had shifted. The guests were quieter, more thoughtful. The staff stood a little straighter, a little softer. The air held a different kind of energy, less about wealth, more about worth. And behind it all stood the woman who had walked in unnoticed and changed everything. The next morning, the story was everywhere. A guest had uploaded the video to social media late the night before, and by sunrise, it had already crossed millions of views. The caption read, "This woman walked into a luxury hotel and got insulted for looking too simple." What she said next stunned the entire lobby. The clip showed Kevin's sarcastic remark, the laughter from the guests, and then, like a cinematic twist, the moment the manager addressed her as the owner of the hotel. Viewers paused, replayed, and shared. People commented from all corners of the country, from cozy apartments to crowded subway stations. She taught them all a lesson without raising her voice. Class and humility. This is what real power looks like. I hope that the receptionist learned something. We all did. Major outlets picked up the story. News channels ran short segments. Talk shows invited guests to discuss the video's message, judgment, humility, and the hidden dignity in everyday people. It became more than just a viral moment. It became a conversation. Back at the hotel, Kevin sat alone in the break room, scrolling through the video on his phone. He had watched it at least a dozen times, each time flinching at his own words. His face, captured mid-smirk, was now circulating across every platform, and not in a way anyone would envy. He'd become the face of judgment, of quick assumptions, of everything the woman had stood against. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and opened the notebook on his lap. The first page was blank. He picked up a pen and began to write. What I've learned about respect. Outside, the woman walked through the lobby again. This time, she didn't go unnoticed. Staff members stood a little taller when she passed. A young hostess greeted her with a nervous smile, unsure whether to say something or simply nod. The woman gave her a warm smile back and said, "You're doing a great job." The girl nearly teared up. As she reached the door, the manager stepped forward to walk her out. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for handling it the way you did, but for reminding us who we are." The woman looked around the lobby, the polished marble floors, the grand chandelier above, the people who once whispered and now stood in reflective silence. "It's easy to get lost in the shine," she said. "Sometimes we just need to be reminded of what really matters." He opened the door for her, and she stepped out into the morning sunlight. Across town, a group of college students were watching the video again, this time pausing at her final words. One of them repeated aloud, "Respect isn't about appearance or wealth. It's about character." Kevin, now off shift, walked through a small bookstore looking for something, anything, that might help him understand what had unfolded. He picked up a book on emotional intelligence, then another on empathy. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to impress. He was trying to grow. And online, in thousands of comments, people began to share their own experiences. Stories of being underestimated, of being looked down on, and of finding strength in moments of quiet grace. The woman had said one sentence that echoed in comment after comment. "Don't judge a book by its cover. You never know who's sitting next to you." It wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It was a mirror, one that made people pause and rethink their own behavior. By the end of the week, the hotel announced a new initiative, a training program built not just around service excellence, but around human connection. The first session began with a quote etched into the glass wall: "See the person, not the clothes, not the status." The person, and in every corner of the internet, on screens large and small, one story kept playing again and again, reminding everyone that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one no one noticed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Let's remind the world, kindness always wins.